Welcome. And I want to say a few things about the McKnight Artist Fellowship and a few thank yous. So first of all, I want to thank the McKnight Foundation for supporting having this fellowship. And I think, as an artist myself here too, I think we're very fortunate to have the foundation support for artists here in the state of Minnesota. And McKnight, who funds not only this program, but also mknightartist.org, the program for which I'm the director. And I think I even didn't introduce myself tonight when I jumped up here. Sometimes I assume I'm always talking to people I know. I'm Scott Stuhl, and I'm the director for mknightartist.org. So I think just a little bit of background is good about the program and also how this came to be at MN Artists, and explains a little bit why we have two exhibitions that we're running concurrently right now as well. So MN Artists was asked to become the administrative home for the Photography Fellowship 3 years ago. And since then, we've kind of been running one exhibition behind. And so this year we decided we would catch up. So we approached both Franklin Artworks and Midway Contemporary to run the exhibition portion of the Photography Fellowship. And we decided to do it as a simultaneous exhibition in order to both catch up and actually this really unique moment that we could take advantage of and having both of these shows up at the same time. So a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure many of you were there for it, we had an opening where both openings were on the same evening. We had a little shuttle bus running between, and it became a really, I think, a nice moment for the photography community and the art community in Minnesota. The McKnight Photography Fellowship, if you aren't aware, is an annual award. We award $25,000 to 4 different mid-career photographers that are residents of the state of Minnesota. And what they get with that is not only an opportunity to have that exhibition and have a catalog produced, but this opportunity for professional development and for, I think, these groups of fellows too, is to be able to meet one another, to meet different curators and artists. And I think each of them had a different experience throughout this, which we'll hear a little bit about tonight. But the hope is that this allows them, it's an award that gives them an honor for what they've already accomplished, but also allows them the ability to be able to do something they may have not been able to in their work, to kind of further their career. All right, enough of me talking. Our first artist this evening is Gina Dabrowski, whose work explores public solid waste disposal sites, specifically the life cycle of burial and reemergence of objects within the landscape. Gina's project is informed by her family history, scavenging scrap metal for additional income, and objects rescued from the trash by her father. The resulting work explores the difficulty of removing the human record from the landscape. Gina has received awards of support from the McKnight Artist Fellowship for Photographers, the Jerome Foundation, and the Minnesota State Arts Board. Visiting artist lectures have included presentations at CalArts, Beijing Film Academy, the Creative College of Studies in Detroit, and Macalester College. The Landfills Project is planned for exhibition at Wells College in Aurora, New York, and Cardinal Stritch University in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 2012. Please welcome Gina Dabrowski.
There are 3 sections to my presentation. First, I was interested in recording how sites looked and the global aspects to waste management. My focus then shifted to look at the human presence in the landfill. And lastly, during my fellowship year, I photographed the less visible aspects of old abandoned and repurposed dumps. With my first McKnight, I photographed bars and clubs, which led me to China. Traveling through Beijing, I was surprised by the apparent lack of garbage generated by such a large city. Where did all the trash go? After returning from China on a road trip from Michigan to Minneapolis, I kept passing landfills and I stopped to take a look. And this is when I began photographing in 2006. One of the first places I photographed was a transfer station in Pine River that specializes in recycling. These refrigerators at the Brainerd landfill will be stripped and recycled, and the parts will be shipped to China to be made into automobiles. This photograph, new cell number 4 under construction, shows the plastic material that's being laid down. It's a thick plastic liner that's used to keep the toxins from leaching into the soil, much like a giant garbage bag. Waste management has evolved from the open pit dumps of the 1970s to a tightly regulated industry. Technology and engineering continue to transform these facilities. In this photograph, regulating equipment, it's used to monitor the methane and the recirculation system. In this photograph here, cap cell completed cell number 1. I'd like to explain what a cell is. It's a section of land that's, first of all, filled and then capped before they move on to the next cell. The Brainerd site will have approximately 7 cells before it is closed, and they're currently on cell number 4. Here's a completed cell in Oaxaca, Mexico, with the active cell in the background. I also explored other locations like Oaxaca because I wanted to see how they treated their garbage and found that there were many similarities. The biggest difference in Mexico is that individuals are allowed to salvage. Here in the US, it's a big business, owned by a corporation or run by the county. In this photograph, a man is standing next to his dump truck as it's being unloaded. A Oaxaca man is collecting cans. So you can see in the background the houses where the workers live. I think of the landfill workers in Mexico as what I call independent contractors. The municipal dump serves as a place of business for the people who dig through the refuse for aluminum and other saleable items. In this photograph of a pond, it's very similar to the leachate ponds that you find at landfills found here in the US. In this photograph, frozen leachate pond here at the Brainerd site, water is flushed through the landfill and neutralized in this leachate pond. It's then reused in a recirculation process to help break down the garbage and turn it into the methane. At the Brainerd site, instead of venting the methane into the atmosphere, which is what some sites do, it's burned off. This photograph was in 2010. When I first started at the Brainerd site in 2006, they were venting methane and then built this, the methane burn. After exploring various dumps throughout the Midwest and Mexico, I settled on the Crow Wing County Sanitary Landfill near Brainerd as my primary focus. I felt this location represented a microcosm of the global, social, and political issues we face every day in our disposal of garbage. The Brainerd space reflects a sense of place within a local context. Much like the photographers from the new topographics, I'm interested in the impact that we have on the landscape. In this photograph done in December of 2011, active cell number 4, I thought that in this case, the shooting conditions were very challenging, like it was freezing outside. But each day, the workers at the site have to compress the cell with a huge compacting machine, regardless of the weather. Using photography, I wanted to examine the residue of people's presence that is preserved in these man-made landscapes constructed of garbage. I was interested to learn that Louis Baltz, one of my influences, had done a series of 7 photographs of a burning dump called Continuous Fire Polar Circle. He's also one of the photographers from the New Topographics, a 1970s exhibition of photographs of the man-altered landscape that, according to the curator, Bill Jenkins, looked at the built environment. What you find at the dump depends on what people are consuming. So in Oaxaca, there were a lot of flowers and fruits, and in Brainerd, I kept seeing boats, power boats, paddle boats, pontoon boats. As my project developed, I began to incorporate portraits of the people dropping off their personal belongings, as well as employees who worked at the site. Many of them have been coming to these facilities since the time when garbage was simply tossed over a hill, and have fascinating stories to tell about the evolution that they've witnessed. Robbie and his family are dropping off their old furniture. Robbie wishes that it was still legal to salvage in the landfill. This is a portrait of a new employee, John Frink, and he is recycling old paint, which is one of the many functions at the facility. In this portrait of John and Virgil, John's father, remembers when he was a boy and picked some discarded bananas from the dump. Their story really resonated with me because I remember helping my father scavenge for scrap metal. My mother told me how he did this to make additional money to help the family. Here are a few photographs of the items that my father salvaged that my family continues to use today. This is a potato masher. And a bread knife. Today it's illegal to salvage or to scavenge, and you can't take anything from the dump. As I mentioned, it's big business. These themes of community and personal history provided the foundation for the work I created during my fellowship year, in which I photographed abandoned and repurposed sites in Brainerd that I recall going to with my family. I was able to access the records of the old dump sites and expanded my project to include the old Brainerd dump. This is a restricted area in the Arboretum, and it was closed the old dump was closed in the 1970s and turned into an Arboretum. In this dump that's been closed for years, you can see a washing machine that has been heaved up from the landscape. In this image titled Fallen Tree, one questions whether it is blown over because it has been weakened by the tires and detritus intertwined with its roots. Here's a close examination reveals evidence of our presence in the landscape. In these spaces, I was particularly interested in the residue of our culture. Because of the extreme weather conditions in Minnesota, this car has reemerged, only to be pulled out in the spring and relocated to another dump site. These reminders become part of the landscape. On the border of the old dump site sits a large apartment complex. What we have discarded is right on the edge of our daily lives. Whether abandoned or repurposed, these sites continue to reveal the human record. Well, I'd like to thank the people who allowed me access to these sites, my friends and family who supported me in my practice, and especially to my mother who helped me scout the dumps. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. I also wanted to thank a few of the people that can make this whole fellowship year possible, and in particular, again, the McKnight Foundation and Laura Zimmerman, Sarah Lovin at the McKnight Foundation, and then also both of the exhibition sites. So since the program has been moved to McKnight Artists, we have been moving also around the exhibition sites. So at Franklin Artworks, Tim Peterson and Colleen Harris for all of their help. At Midway Contemporary, John Rasmussen, Megan McCready, Aaron Van Dyke, and all of their staff are really assisting throughout the whole year. So meeting with the fellows, kind of figuring out the exhibition, and also kind of helping throughout the whole process. So thank you to all of them. And then a big thanks to, and I kind of put the thanks a little bit deeper into this is Jarrett Patrick, if she's here. She's been helping us with Drawing Club throughout the day, so I wanted to make sure that she was able to get in here. Who is the program assistant and helps me with every aspect of this program, and really couldn't do all of this without Jarrett's help. So really, I thank her for all of her work on the program. Our next artist is Chuck Avery. Chuck Avery graduated from the Kansas City Arts Institute in 1977 with an emphasis on the documentary mode of photography. His work since 2003 has concentrated on suburban expansion and sprawl and the language and messaging found in historical sites and museums. He's exhibited locally and internationally, and his work is included in the collections of the Weizmann Art Museum and Nelson Atkins Museum of Art in Kansas City. Please welcome Chuck Avery.
Thank you, Scott. Oh, let's go back. I want to talk tonight a little bit about the project that I did for this past year for the McKnight Foundation and how it has evolved over the years for me. It started back when I was a senior at the Kansas City Art Institute. I did a one-semester independent study project where I hopped into my 65 Chevy and drove around the upper Midwest, and basically my objective was to find tourist attractions and museums along the way. And I didn't have a very tightly defined focus on what I was looking for. I was just more curious about the messaging in there and just the strange objects and sometimes the strange juxtapositions that you find when traveling to these places. I didn't limit myself to any particular type or style of attraction or museum. I went to Chicago. There was the Museum of Science and Industry, some of the bigger institutions like that. And then you'd find little places over like in Baraboo here where you have tucked away in a small town a museum to the circus industry. It was the fun part of this trip was going into the smaller places, the county museums that you would find, the mom and pop kind of operations that were kind of more of a string it together and throw it up on the wall and let's see what we get there. Oh, sorry. So it was a trip that was kind of just about the fun of being on the road and discovering new and interesting places and displays. I graduated in 1977 then. Oh, I should also state that from that project I produced 2 books. It was a 2-volume book which I called simply Sightseeing. About a year after graduating, I got married, raised kids, and pretty much put the cameras in the closet for almost 25 years. I took the occasional fling with the cameras on the occasional weekend. But by about 2001, 2002, I was able to pick the cameras up again and start shooting. And one of the themes that I was following up on was what I had started back in art school, which was sightseeing, the tourism industry. And with my children still with me a part of the time, they were still growing and not hadn't left the house yet, we would be going to the county fairs. We would inevitably end up at the Wisconsin Dells after driving to Iowa to see my folks. And I started to get interested in just the alternative realities that you find at some of these places. Just the strange constructions that they build to tell a story. So after a couple years of doing this, I found myself migrating a little bit more again to the museums. There was just an innate curiosity for me to go into these places and just discover what they had to offer there. About 2007 then, I decided to hone that focus a little bit more and start looking at these museums and start looking at the interpretation of history, the interpretation of culture that you find in these places. So 2007, I took a long road trip out to the Black Hills area, out to the Dakotas, because that place, it's pretty rich in history. You've got your Mount Rushmore, and there's a whole lot of patriotic, political museums and places that you go to learn about your past. So I was interested in the messaging here, how they told the story, what the story was that they were telling. This formed the basis for my proposal for the McKnight year here. And I wanted to get a little bit more involved and take a little bit deeper look into the politics and the cultural ramifications that you find in going through these places. But what you find a lot of times here is a building or a perpetuation of cultural mythologies, be it old mythologies or creating a new one. Which leads us to the present moment. And what I'm showing here is the last part is what I found while traveling on the road this past year. What I did for the McKnight year was I selected 6 destinations around the country that had either historical or cultural import, selected destinations within those areas, and flew in, spent a long weekend photographing. A couple instances, I flew into an area and then spent a week and a half doing extensive road trips and visiting these places. What I wanted to do with this project was to get away from a regional scope, which I had done previously by photographing around the Minnesota and Dakota area and a little bit in Wisconsin and Iowa, and give it more of a national scope and try to make more of a comment on our national identity. And sometimes the images play off against each other side by side quite well, where they comment upon each other. And that's these 2 images here, the Harry Truman's Bar and Hiroshima Memorial, are intended to be kind of a diptych, where they kind of inform each other on a historical event. As I put these, the images from these trips together, there was a lot of, as I started editing down, it seemed like a lot of the images were becoming more metaphorical than actual documentary reportage. and they started to become about institutional powers that have a part of our lives every day, whether we are aware of it or not. And also about how we perceive our past. What are some of the, here's mythology at work right here. And then we have stories about heroism and how we enshrine and honor our heroes. That being Neil Armstrong. And then sometimes it's just fun to see strange layouts and how objects are put together or how a certain idea is portrayed. And sometimes you just find very bizarre juxtapositions that you're not sure why everything's there. So my last image here, I'll just give a nod to all the events over in St. Paul today. And with that, that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. I think it's interesting looking at the collection of artists, the fellows here too. And I think the one thing that always comes up is in the process do the jurors try to construct an exhibition from it? And they really don't. I can tell you from sitting in that process. So it's also the one perk I feel with being in this position is being able to be in the room, not only for the fellows to come in and see their work and their presentation, but to hear the jurors deliberate about things, and often just have these very interesting discussions about contemporary photography in general. It's one of those kind of interesting perks. But I think what's interesting is seeing this group of artists, and then what you'll see next week is there are some very similar themes throughout the work that have kind of emerged. Something that wasn't necessarily intentional why it was picked, but I think it's kind of interesting seeing them together. Our third artist is Lex Thompson. Lex Thompson's work focuses on manifestations of hope, failure, and irony in the American landscape. He received his MFA in photography from the San Francisco Art Institute. His work has been exhibited at Exit Art and Point of View Gallery in New York City, SF Camera Work and Southern Exposure in San Francisco, the Soap Factory in Minneapolis, and Art House in Austin. He's a recipient of a 2008 and 2011 Minnesota State Art Sport Artist Initiative grant. His work is included in the collections at the Getty Research Institute, Museum of Fine Arts Boston, Museum of Fine Arts Houston, UCLA, and Yale University, among others. Please welcome Lex Thompson.
Hi, I want to start with just a thanks to Scott and Jara for all their work here, and to Tim and Colleen at Franklin for all they did making the exhibition possible, and then, of course, to Laura and the McKnight Foundation, who are very much responsible for all of this. My project, Mahalo, takes its title, the Hawaiian word for thank you, which is one of those words that tourists have a tendency to come learn, one of the few words they learn, and then overuse to the point where it's painful. Interestingly enough, I think the word became very important to me because of that element, as well as the fact that it's also a word that was developed post-colonial contact. It was noted that the Hawaiian people had a very strong sense of gratitude and graciousness, but had no word really to say thank you. So they made one. And I think that relationship between sort of the outside and the inside of Hawaii is an important one for the things that I came to think about in this work. I went to Hawaii initially as the western terminus of American expansion to finish a previous project about manifest destiny. And while I was there, I photographed much more than I had really expected to, and widely outside the scope of my original project. I come to Hawaii with a vision that had been formed primarily by Elvis and Magnum PI and Hawaii Five-0. It was all grass skirts and surfing and umbrella drinks. And this idyllic vision of the islands was accurate but incomplete. And the photographs that I made there recognize both of these realities. This is a bronze sculpture of Akebono Taro, who is a Hawaiian born under the name Chad Rowan, became a Japanese sumo champion, changed his name and his nationality. And these kinds of interactions and sort of cultural relationships that happen in these tiny islands became very interesting to me. There's several types of images in the series. Photographs that I made while in Hawaii form the core of the project. And with them are photographs of artifacts that I brought back from Hawaii. This is a map that shows you where you can go to a simulated moon surface in case you're training to be an astronaut. If you go there, it actually looks very much like everything else in Hawaii. Rocky lava fields, they're all very similar, moon surface or not. And these images are then modified by photos I made from television of scenes that were formative in my pre-vision of Hawaii. This is Elvis in Blue Hawaii, one of his better movies. I mean, that's of course qualified by it being one of Elvis's movies to begin with. Here is a zebra. I'm really not entirely sure who's trying to convince whom of what in this image, but. And then as a counterweight to the television images, I've created some drawings of photographs that I wish I had made. And these are scenes that I saw but failed to photograph for some reason. Lack of access, a technical failure, or a lack of sort of realizing the importance of the image until after it was too late, maybe. The mental image of them then haunted me, romanticized by my memory and nostalgia, to the point where it had become a defining image in my mind. They're kind of and so then I came back and drew them. They're my Hawaiian post visions, and are just as idealized and probably distanced from reality as the images and visions made from television. This is in a bed and breakfast in a coffee plantation where I was awoken by peacocks and roosters about every hour, I would say. This is a ceiling mural painted by a Belgian priest in a church. He painted the entire church. And this is a print of a heiau, which is a Hawaiian religious and holy site that is in the hotel room at the King Kamehameha, and out the window you can see the actual site itself. And these are history prints, not actual paintings, but you can see in sort of the center one on the right, the crease down the middle where the print has been folded before it was put into the frame. And These are at the Polynesian Cultural Center, which is, well, if you know the kind of World of Nations at Epcot Center, well, this is the Polynesian Islands version of that. It's run by the Mormons in Hawaii, who happen to be the largest population of Mormons outside of Utah is in Hawaii, and they run the Polynesian Cultural Center. This is the phone book from my hotel room in Kauai. It's really something that the phone company's ability to market the stereotyped image of Hawaii directly to you while you're there in your hotel. Of course, this is Magnum riding in his helicopter. This is a Belgian tourist who's traveling to a site on Molokai, a leper colony that was founded by a Belgian priest, and so he's having this kind of this pilgrimage to this site that's very much held in great esteem by the Hawaiian people. And here is the perfect wave. And here's the perfect wave that you can pose in. This is the kitchen at the Cocoa Palms Resort, which is on the island of Kauai, and is the resort that, or it's the hotel that the final scenes of Blue Hawaii are filmed in. It's where Elvis gets married. And it was destroyed in a hurricane in the 1990s and has never been rebuilt for various zoning reasons. This is a scene at the Volcano House at Volcanoes National Park with these three 19th century romantic kind of landscape paintings. There's a whole school of volcano painting that developed during the 19th century. Primarily volcanoes erupting at night. I think this sort of these Europeans and Americans traveling, making this arduous journey to the erupting volcano is this kind of aesthetic colonialism that in some ways I feel like I was kind of conscious of sort of continuing with a camera. This is the site of a subdivision that was completely destroyed by lava flow, and some people have started resettling on it without any kind of utilities or infrastructure, water, power, anything like that. And this is Minahune Fish Pond. Like in this image, I'm very interested in how much these sort of scenic, beautiful landscapes really are a part of Hawaii at the same time as I'm also photographing these things that are maybe kind of less idyllic. But this is, this fish pond is supposedly was constructed by the Minahune, which were tiny little people that were on the islands of Hawaii before the Hawaiians got there, and they used to make lots of really big stuff. I guess they stopped. And this is a pool at the Ohio Gulch, or the 7 sacred pools in Maui, which sort of seeing, initially for me seeing all these, and even doing it myself, these sort of Americans and coming and swimming in these sacred pools seemed, well, wrong. But it turns out they never were actually sacred. They just got named that to get Americans and Europeans and stuff to come swim in them. And then here, this is Haleakala Crater in Maui. right, well, that's my last one, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Lex. I want to check out volcano paintings now. I think that's kind of interesting. It kind of reminds me like photographing a sunset, of kind of like how futile that is painting a volcano. One thing I want to mention, kind of looking forward, is that the thing about running a program like this is you're always in the middle of a cycle and on to the next one. So next year, we've already named our 2011, 2012 fellows, and that is Colleen Mullins, Peter Happel-Christian, James Henkel, and Beth Dow. And they're just beginning their fellowship year, and their exhibition will be happening at the Rochester Arts Center in Rochester, Minnesota. So this will be the first time in a while we've had a outstate site for that exhibition. And that'll be actually happening in the fall of next year, of 2012. And it'll be a little bit longer exhibition with the hope that people make the journey down to Rochester. And working there for several years myself, I definitely encourage you to come down and see the Art Center if you haven't done that. Next year will be a good excuse to do that. All right, our final artist this evening is Paul Shambroom. Paul Shomrim is a photographer who explores American power and culture. For over 20 years, he has documented subjects ranging from industrial and office environments, the U.S. nuclear arsenal, small-town council meetings, and post-9/11 Homeland Security preparations. His most recent project is Shrines and Public Weapons in America. Paul's work is in collections of the Whitney Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the Art Institute of Chicago, and the Walker Art Center, and many others. His photographs were included in the 1997 Whitney Biennial, and he also has had solo exhibitions at many institutions, including the Walker Art Center, Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago, and galleries in New York, Chicago, San Francisco, and London. His work has been published in 3 monographs: Paul Shambroom Picturing Power, Meetings, and Face to Face with the Bomb, Nuclear Reality After the Cold War. Paul has received fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Creative Capital Foundation, and the Bush Foundation, among others. He was born in Teaneck, New Jersey, and lives in Minneapolis. And Paul was recently named Assistant Professor of Art at the University of Minnesota, Minneapolis. Please welcome Paul Shambroom.
Thank you. I also want to echo Lex's thank you to Scott and Jara from McKnight Artists and the Walker for facilitating this program so graciously, and also to Tim Peterson and Colleen Harris from Franklin Artworks, which is a wonderful venue. And I also want to thank all the artists in both the shows. It's wonderful to share the walls with you. This project for me is a little bit of a step backwards into straight documentary work, which is a type of photography that I had sort of been edging away from through projects over the years, where I was doing some manipulating of the images, some digital manipulation, and a variety of other ways to kind of push the envelope of documentary. But for this project, I'm kind of right squarely back in it, because I still think photographs, we tend to believe them. There's no reason to not believe a lot of photographs, and I think sort of the predictions of the death of photography, of straight photography, are a little premature. So for 3 years, I traveled around the country photographing weapons that were no longer functioning as weapons, that had taken on a variety of different functions, and you'll see in the small selection of pictures. Often they're serving as memorials, tourist attractions, signage, a variety of different purposes. I tend to approach my projects motivated by wanting to learn something myself. I have ideas and points of view, and I really try and not pay so much attention to those, but just to look at things and try and come to some understanding. I can't say over the 3 years of having worked on this project that I really understand this any better than I did when I started. I find it very puzzling that weapons that kill people are used as memorials to the dead. And I still don't quite understand the function that they serve in that way. And some questions have kind of come up for me since I began for this. I think they're meant at some level to memorialize the dead, but also to help inspire new generations of warriors, that there's, this sort of air of patriotism, which means a lot of different things to different folks. So anyway, as with many of my projects, I had sort of a obsessive-compulsive aspect to this one that involved a lot of research, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I set up some very basic parameters. I was photographing weapons from the entire range of American wars, a few from the Revolutionary War and some from the Civil War. This is a battlefield in Virginia, Manassas National Battlefield. And one of the questions that this particular photograph really brings up is, as time goes by, do the weapons kind of lose their connection to death, their connection to violence? These are beautiful old bronze cannons that have, taken on this lovely green patina in there. Often you'll see them placed in, I'll get to this in a minute, you'll see them placed in town squares and so on. And for one thing, they become sort of invisible. I don't know if any of you live in a community that has a weapon on public display. If it's been there since you were a kid, it's there. You tend to not see it after a while, and I find that to be kind of an interesting phenomenon. So research, I'll just talk briefly about this. It's a wonderful time to be doing research as a photographer or as anybody. There's so much information available online. This is an image of the map that I assembled from my laptop from a variety of sources. And this is a Google Earth map. And there's different groups that, for instance, there's a group, an online group that I think they're called POP, Planes on Poles or Planes on Sticks or something. And they've assembled a collection of photographs and geocoordinates for many, many hundreds of aircraft that are mounted on poles all across the country. So I was able to just slurp that into my database, and when I was driving around, see where these things were. I also did a lot of research on Flickr using Boolean logic data searches. And Flickr is an amazing research tool because everything in the world practically has been photographed and is available with keywords. And so if you do a very careful search, you can find stuff. If I had just put in cannons in Massachusetts as a search, there would be 100,000 hits, which is basically useless. You can't make any use of that. But by specifying that it has to be a memorial or a park or a town square, for instance, I was able to find a lot of things that I wouldn't have been able to find otherwise. So this is the Flickr page for a tank that I found in Massachusetts. And I'm just going to show a couple of different ways of looking at images, and not going to have time to get into it, but it's really started me thinking about whether it's even that useful for me to be making my own photographs anymore. So my next project probably will not be with my own photographs from my own camera. But anyway, here's the Flickr page. It says actually I can't read it, U.S. Army, I'm sorry, the monitor up here is not working. So I take this tank, I put it on my map with a little T for tank, the different weapons. A is for artillery, because I was planning a trip to Massachusetts. And then before I decided whether I wanted to go there, I wanted to take a closer look, so I went to Google Earth and tried to look at it from the aerial photographs. And you can barely make it out. It's in the top of the parking lot. You see there's kind of a quarter circle of yellow stripes, and it's that little gray thing up there. So of course, we also have the luxury now of being able to zoom down to street level. And so this is what the tank looked like from there. And you couldn't really see much. Obviously the Google streetcar was not following the rules of photography where, they're supposed to have the sun over your back shoulder. So this is the photograph that I ended up making, which is very different from, the other images. And, it's sort of playing up the irony of the signage and things that I found interesting. But that whole process of being able to zoom around the world and look at photographs of things that are of interest, it's a very short step between what I did for this project and the next step, which was not for me to have to go and bother to make the photographs. That said, I love making photographs, and I'm not going to give it up entirely, but this was very much a good opportunity for me to, sort of as a formalist exercise, to photograph these as objects, as sculptural objects in the landscape. This is a cruise missile off the interstate in Georgia. No sign, nothing explaining why it's there. In this, it left me sort of speechless, but it helped me come up with a new motto for photography, and my motto is this: you can't make this shit up. Straight photographs, you just can't beat them sometimes. And there's a story behind this. I don't really know what the story is, why these people chose to do this, but it was one of the happiest days of my life. I know it's supposed to be the happiest day for the bride and groom, but it was my happy day too when I discovered this. This is kind of right in our backyard. This is in Como Park in St. Paul. It's a World War II torpedo. This is in San Francisco. It's actually in that island that's in the bay between San Francisco and Oakland. And it's a naval shell, a 16-inch naval shell. I mean, every one of these weapons that you're seeing here, if you were on the other end of it, it's a deadly, horrible weapon. Even those Civil War cannon that seems so quaint and pretty in the landscape under the walnut tree. If you were on the battlefield and you saw the people on the other side wheel this thing around and aim it towards you, man, you were in for a world of hurt. So this is in this lovely setting in San Francisco. The kind of blue paint and stuff dripping on it, I don't think that was intentional. I think it was just a coating that went bad, but it became an object of beauty. This is a VFW hall in Georgia with this very strange facade on front of a kind of sheet metal building. I'm just going to go through a couple more. I know we're getting at the end of our time here, and I know you're all dying to get out in that heat. So this is a Titan intercontinental ballistic missile that is in the parking lot between the Chevron and the Crystal Burger off the interstate in Georgia. I love Georgia. Georgia and North Dakota, for photography, for what I do, you can't beat them. Southern California playground, Richmond, Virginia, a battleship coming right at you. And, this is also in our backyard. This is in St. Bonifacius, Minnesota. This is a Nike air defense missile in the city park, right by the little gazebo with the chairs and stuff. This was another happy day for me. I can't explain why, but a church decided that they needed this is a surface-to-air missile that tells us, it helps, I think it helps reinforce this passage from Scripture. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and you can make up the rest. I think this is the final picture. I don't know, are these a little heavy-handed? Maybe, but is that because I'm a heavy-handed photographer, or is it because, I mean, this isn't just my juxtaposition in the camera. This is what's in this town. This is a small town in New Hampshire, and they have a church, and they have a nuclear missile. And behind me, there's a little ice cream store. And that's about it. Okay. So yeah, it's a wacky world, and I'm happy I'm here to see it and take pictures of it. So thank you.
We're going to invite the panel to come up front here for a moment. We'll do a quick question and answer session. So get your questions ready. And also, if those of you that know people that couldn't make it this evening, we are filming tonight. You can keep that in mind as you're thinking your questions too. We are filming tonight, so it will be available on the Walker channel. So I'll invite the panel to come on up into the cool chairs. And I could go with a lot of different questions. I'm actually really interested in how, like, each of you are traveling and how that's changed and the research that you're doing and the ability to use online. But I'm going to ask you the really obvious question. I'll let the audience ask some of those more specific questions. But it's a question I think that gets asked often after this. You've had your fellowship year, and we saw through your presentations a lot of what would happen during that fellowship. So what's next? What's the projects that you're working on next?
I guess I'll go first. I don't know. I think it's going to take me another many months to kind of fully digest what I've immersed myself here in the last year. And from that, find my direction, where I'm going to go from there. There were a lot of different threads that came out of the project that I was doing, so I've got to decide if there's anything worth following, or do I need to just break off and go another direction. I think whatever I do, I want it to be about, I want it to be political. I want it to be about our cultural identity. So that's just the vague direction where I see I'm going to go.
Well, one of the places that I visited on a drive from Los Angeles to Minneapolis was an old landfill that had been turned into a shopping mall with Nordstrom's and Saks Fifth Avenue right on top of the old site. So that's one of the things that I'm going to look more closely at, are these repurposed facilities, sites that are parks and malls and arboretums.
Well, I touched on it a little bit in my talk. I'm wading in the Flickr pool, I guess is the best way to describe it. I'm still interested in themes of militarism and violence in American culture. So I've been looking at Flickr photographs, particularly using short search terms, sort of I like the poetry aspect. It's almost like a little haiku that you throw at your computer and it spits back images at you. So I've been doing, my favorite is Paintball Bruise, which brings up a nice little selection of images. So I'm putting together some book projects and also some sculptural installations that will incorporate those ideas.
This one's on, right? Yeah. Is it? No? Yeah, okay. In like 2 weeks, I'm going back to Hawaii again, so it'll be really hard. A few more things to do there to try and fill some holes. I'm going to follow that Belgian to the leper colony, some things like that, so.
We'll invite some questions from the audience, and please wait for the mic to come down from the ushers so that we can make sure that we get you on the recording.
This is a question for Paul. When you were researching for your photographs of the monuments with the weapons, and you were looking at different pictures from Flickr or what have you, maybe even documentation from the facilities that have those things, was it something that you did mindfully to like try and make a picture that was different, that didn't exist before, or did you just take the picture that you wanted to take regardless of if there was a picture that was already out there that looked like that?
Well, it's a little bit complicated, the answer to that. I would show up and try and make the best picture I could. By what criteria, I couldn't possibly explain it. All my projects, I have a lot of heavy concept before and intellectualizing before and after, but when I'm there, I'm just a boy with his camera, and I just try and look through the rectangle and see what I like. Usually, I love Flickr. There's great photographs on it. It's a very interesting culture. Any of you have Flickr accounts? I know you do, Carla. It's an interesting place and kind of a scary place if you don't know the rules, as I found out. But usually it wasn't hard. There was no problem for me to make photographs that I thought, okay, this other one was a good reference, but I'm making a photograph I like. Occasionally I'd show up at a place and I could never make a photograph as good as the one that was on Flickr originally. So.
Gina, I'm wondering if you have any interest in the gleaner culture or dumpster diving culture artistically.
It's not an area that I looked into in my project or had given much thought to, I guess. So in your question, it's something new to me. But I'm aware of people, of course, who do dumpster dive. And it actually kind of spans a very broad economic spectrum. From when I was at McAllister, there were students that did that as well with nearby bakeries, and to people who use that. Like, for example, when I was in Los Angeles, it was very apparent when you would see people actually rummaging through garbage in order to have something to eat. And so it's interesting that you would ask that, because I think back on that and was incredibly moved by that and haven't quite figured out what exactly I would do with something.
That I really liked your work, and it felt to me like it wasn't entirely ironic. I mean, there is obviously irony in the work of all of the photographers, but I felt like you were looking for some kind of something redemptive in what was going on.
Well, I'm not going to call on anybody, but but if we don't have any more questions, I think I will ask one question to close, unless anybody else has another question. But I'm interested in that kind of, and coming back to kind of the idea of the traveling in your work, and I know it's been mentioned in some of your presentations, but just more of a process question. It's like, and I know. Paul, you mentioned this kind of in your presentation, but how much planning do you do prior to your trip? Is it something that you're doing in a very short period of time that you're photographing, or is it something that you're kind of extended period of time, but kind of how much planning goes in, and then how much is actually going out and shooting the work? That's for all of you.
Well, I don't think I did nearly the extensive planning that Paul did here. I did what I could. I'm working full-time, 40 hours and all that. So I spent about a month and a half poring over maps, doing a little Google searching, finding my destinations. And then, because of the time of the calendar, I had to get out on the road. I started photographing in early August and was finished by the middle of November. So I tried to compress all my shooting into that short period of time, which gave me a short period of time to prepare for that. So, yeah, I probably did a lot more time on the road photographing than I did in my research. But again, what I basically did was determine my destinations and then research that particular area and went from there.
In my working process, I use both this methodical approach to investigation and observing what it is that I see, and then allow room for discovery. One of the things that Mary Ann Combs said to me when I was interviewed by her about my project was whether or not I had observed, like firsthand, what it was that the people did at the landfill. Did I shadow anyone? And I thought, what a great idea. And so for the person who did the compressing with this big heavy equipment, I spent the day on the machine with him. And it was a point of view that I never would have experienced had I not kind of been open to that. And I'm still thinking about where that might lead me in my work and with this project. But it's that part of discovery that, I guess, along with the planning that I do.
This project actually was a lot more shooting. The ratio of shooting to everything else was a lot higher than this. Some of my previous projects, the nuclear weapons project, it was probably 99 days of planning and correspondence and research to every 1 day of shooting because there are access issues. This time, once I found out where the places were, I could go whenever I wanted, and that was a real pleasure. I mean, it was so much fun. The only thing that would have made it more fun is if there were people there to talk to and photograph as part of it. But I'd say, I don't know, this project was about even thirds, maybe 1/3 research and planning, 1/3 photographing, and 1/3 kind of post-production and printmaking, and a lot of research afterwards, finding out something, if I could, about the provenance of these weapons, where they had been made, where they had they actually been in combat. So each one sort of has its own little story to tell, and at some point I hope to do a book, and we'll dig more into that. But yeah, more shooting this time.
Yeah, so I use the internet very much for the research portion, and often looking, finding particular sites to go to, but then I pencil them in on a cut-up AAA map and write tiny little numbers with tiny little notations that later I have trouble reading, and they correspond to this long list with directions about how to get to things and stuff. But then all of that ends up being something that sort of sets up a guide for where to go and how to start. But half the time it's just tripping over something along the way that that's more productive, I would think.
Well, I'd like to thank all of you this evening for coming to talk, and thank you all for attending. I hope to see you next week. And I guess we head back outside into the heat. And the bar is still open. There's music outside, and the galleries are still open till 9 o'clock. So thank you, and good night.